Coming up on this week's A Lively Experiment, it's Biden-Trump round one. We'll have a full breakdown of the debate. And a new poll shows the presidential race in Rhode Island is surprisingly close. And Governor McKee with a lot of work to do to boost his approval ratings.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazenwhite Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.
Joining us with the analysis, Brown University political science professor Wendy Schiller, attorney and former state representative Nick Gorham, and Boston Globe reporter Ed Fitzpatrick. Hello and welcome to Lively. I'm Jim Hummel, and it's great having you with us this week. It was not the debate that President Biden had hoped for. Thursday's matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden got off to a rocky start and steadily went downhill for the president. It had even the Democratic analysts afterwards wondering if he needs to be replaced on the ticket. We're not quite there yet. Wendy, let me begin with you. We've had conversations over the last year about this. You look like Nostradamus now, because back in the early months of this year, you said that could be a possibility, and a lot of people said, I'm not sure.
Well, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they have control over who their nominee is. They have processes, but Biden would have to release his delegates that he's accumulated across the country who ran in a primary pledging to vote for Biden. If he releases them, they're open to vote for whomever they want at the Democratic convention. They've already agreed to back up and vote early, virtually, in the beginning of August, before the actual convention in Chicago. They could replace him. The question is, who do they replace him with that would do better against Trump? The responsibility of the national party is to say, does Biden bring down the rest of the ticket? If it's just about Biden not doing well and Republicans and Democrats who are running in contested seats in the House and the Senate, the Democrats still see a good landscape for themselves, then, they can replace Biden. But they have to think about not just the presidency, but what does Biden at the head of the ticket do to their chances of keeping the Senate or winning the House back, among other things.
We'll get into the long run in a second. Let's start with the debate last night.
Well, my first assessment of it was it wasn't that bad, but I stayed watching CNN, and there was just like this waterfall of panic.
Why did you not think it was that bad as you were watching?
Because I thought, Trump's answers were very truncated. Same thing, repeated the same thing over and over again. He stuck to his script, but he didn't expand. And I thought he would have been better off expanding on some of his ideas, and he didn't do that at all. Biden was, pretty bad. I thought every time he looked at Trump, he looked like someone who was in a nursing home, walking around. His face was just, his mouth was open, and he didn't look good.
Yeah, the split screen didn't do him any favors.
No, not at all. But I thought, they both had a mediocre performance. And then when CNN came on, as I said, it was amazing.
Yeah, they were
ready to throw him off the ship.
They were preparing the Tombstone.
I mean, maybe all you need to know is that before the debate was over, you had Nick Kristof, the New York Times columnist, saying we need to recruit either Gretchen Whitmer or and he also mentioned Gina Raimondo, the former governor of Rhode Island. So, I mean, yeah, it set off alarm bells throughout the Democratic establishment. That debate was not going to hinge on whether one of the candidates succeeded in articulating a view on foreign policy or domestic policy. The big question for Biden was, is he too old? And he came across looking feeble and old. He was mumbling. Like, there was one moment where he just talked about, we're going to beat Medicaid. And, he had lost his
and then he had stopped.
His thought. He did get stronger as it went on, but, they always refer to the JFK-Nixon debate, that if you listen to it on the radio, you might think Nixon won, but if you watched it, you thought JFK won. But I think if you watched it or listened to it, I was listening to the start of it on the radio coming back from Boston, you thought Biden was doing poorly. So I thought that was worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think Biden had a terrible start. the first 20 minutes were just really cringeworthy. But then I think the content of what he said on NATO, on being an alliance for democracy, of fighting Putin, of the things that he did on climate change, content was actually pretty good. I agree with you. I think he got better on articulating content. And he answered questions that he was given. Trump didn't answer a single question on the policies that he was asked about. And the anchors at CNN, to me, were completely zombie-like and never followed up and didn't push President Trump at all. It was almost as if they were frightened of Donald Trump. I mean, it made Megyn Kelly look like a superhero from her debate performance in 2016 as an anchor for Fox. So I really thought that it was a terrible debate from that perspective. It allowed President Trump to speak longer, not answer questions, and President Biden was playing by the rules, as Democrats frequently do, and trying to answer the questions based on policy. So this was a decision by the Biden campaign to do this. It was a terrible mistake. And you think about the strategy, and you think about the inner circle advising Biden. And the Democrats have to look in a mirror that they have been avoiding for a couple of months now. But America has to look in that same mirror. And I'm not sure this debate made people who don't like Donald Trump any more enthusiastic about Donald Trump. I think the end game is that they stay home.
Rather than come home to the
I don't think
party,
they're going to go home to Donald Trump, the independents who have defected over the years. But if they do stay home, Biden loses. So what's the difference?
What about the moderators? Because I thought that same thing. I think the strategy was, because look, Jake Tapper has said things about Donald Trump. I'm not sure he was the best guy, but I think they were very aware, let's not look like we're biased. I think they were thinking that the candidates would fact check each other in real time. And Biden just wasn't up to it.
No, it was just the fire hose of lies from Trump, and the moderators did not jump in. I don't know if that was the agreement that they were going to leave it to the candidates to fact-check each other, but there was no fact-checking in real time. And, I think the listeners would have been well served by that. There was a debate the prior week on another set of candidates where the moderator did it in real time. It was real service, And
how tough would it have been to ask him about January 6th, to ask him about the election, to ask him about this, and then if he says, I want to talk about that, no, I want you to answer that question now. And I think that would have, and nobody's going to think that's impolite, because he did. I think Trump realized he did that so many times. They're not going to fact check me, and I can go off. So it's a classic campaigning trick. Talk about what you want, not trick, but it's a strategy, what you want to talk about. Not what they want to talk about.
A lot of the time, though, I really think they press Republicans much harder on the facts than they do, in these presidential debates, especially with Trump. At least in the 2020 election, I thought they were really hard on Trump and not very hard on Biden, and here we are. I don't know where.
And this was the reverse last night. I mean, it was,
it was
much
neutral.
Tougher.
And
it wasn't neutral. They were the questions that they asked Trump and the way that they let him get away with not answering them was not neutral. And of course, because Biden's the incumbent, so they're going to be tougher as they were on Trump in 2020 and 2024. They're tougher on the incumbent. The incumbent has responsibility for the economy or the border.
I don't think they were tough on either of them last night, which is interesting. The big question I have is, where have the Democrats been? Biden has been like this for months and months and months, and they just kept supporting him and supporting him and supporting him. And then suddenly, last night, it was like Niagara Falls opening up. This guy's no good. We got to get rid of him. You had David Axelrod imploring everyone to just dump him.
Van Jones was almost in tears.
David Axelrod.
Where were they?
David Axelrod has been saying this for a long time, and there's a little bit of Obama-Biden competition there. I'm not sure what's going on there. And Van Jones, he's always Van Jones. So
go ahead.
I was just going to say that, they did push him at one point with Trump, at one point where they said, would you accept the results of the election? And he dodged it 3 times, which is kind of chilling. Would you?
He said, if it's fair.
And then he used the big fat if of, if I think it's fair, then I'll accept the results and not.
We didn't say I, though. He said if it was a fair election, he would accept it.
Meaning,
if I win,
if I win, it's going to be fair. Come on.
I knew that would uncork things.
You're triggering Wendy.
Dana Bash did say, this is what they did. He would dodge for the vast majority of his time, and then she'd say, well, you have 80 seconds left. Could you tell us what you do on climate policy? Yeah. And no, don't say, well, we'll give you more time. Tell us what you do on climate. Yeah. We're going to have the best water, in the best era. It was such classic Trump.
Environmental numbers.
I found
He's
it,
got the best environmentals. What numbers are those?
I found it
tell you.
entertaining. I found it entertaining, which I think a lot of Trump supporters did too. He was vintage Trump. And he has been a man who's gotten away with things his entire life, and nobody seems to be able to stop him. So, he keeps going. I mean, this should not be surprising to anybody.
I think Biden got a really free ride last time. I mean, let's face it, he spent, 5 weeks in a basement in Delaware, during the campaign, and nobody said anything about it.
He
And
should.
now it's all coming
He
home
should have
to
stayed in
roost.
the basement.
He's
He should have
not-
stayed in the
he's
basement
not ready
this
for
time.
the. He's not.
The
fit for
Democrats are
office.
saying if we get the Joe Biden gave the last two State of the Union addresses, we're going to be good. We got to see.
Right.
But and now it's I had a cold.
Remember that? But you remember that whole thing? They said they were doing the preemptive strike. That if Joe Biden does well, he's on some performance enhancer. He could have used a little bit of the old.
Juice and
Well,
Joe, they were saying,
I do think that, if you watch that debate as a Democrat or an independent or somebody who doesn't want Trump, and you think about projecting U.S. power across the globe, Trump is inconsistent and seems to like dictators more than I would like him to. But if you thought who's going to cut the best deals and scare people across the globe, Trump made the case in that debate that he was the better candidate. He did. He was like, people are going to be, and I think that's what could push independents back to Trump.
I think it sounds a little bit like Ronald Reagan. He scared a lot of people around the globe because the Democrats pushed so hard to convince the public that he was crazy and that he was going to start World War III.
It was interesting, though, that he invoked Reagan's name several times.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. And so, that does have an effect. I'm not saying it's something you want to play with. I mean, you're kind of playing with fire, right, when you do that. But it does have an effect. And I think a lot of the leaders of the world probably are going to think Trump is more dangerous than Biden to them.
Yeah.
And maybe that's
I
something
think
that we want.
Just to be devil's advocate about this whole debate is I think most Americans have already made up their minds about these two candidates. They know them so well. A lot of them don't like either one of them. So I don't know how much of the number is going to move as a result of last night's debate.
So
we see that.
Before we move on, because we got a lot of other stuff to get to, we're 7 weeks from the Democratic convention, and it's interesting because the Republicans are going to meet shortly in mid-July. So they have 7 weeks, and then we're 18 weeks out from I got out my calendar last night, 18 weeks away from the election. Play out the scenario. Who are the options? Michelle Obama's not an option? Is she an option at this point?
To me, there is really only one option if you're going to replace Biden, and that's Gretchen Whitmer. And the reason is she's won Michigan twice as governor. And last time she won by 54% or something like that. She brought in a lot of Democrats to the legislature. She's tough. She survived a kidnapping threat, a very violent, scary kidnapping threat. She does really well on television. I think you can't play throw it up and let's figure out who lands. You can't be maybe Gina, maybe. It has to be the person
Targeted.
who can win a swing state in the upper Midwest who plays well with lots of groups. This is the only person you can replace him with. And it could be an all-female ticket. And you know what? People say, that can't win, that can't win. Well, we don't know if it can't win. So I think that, to me, if you're going to disrupt, you have to disrupt it in an organized fashion.
But does she bring in the black vote, the progressives,
She's done very well.
The young people who may have left Biden?
In Michigan, with a large Arab/Palestinian population that's unhappy with Biden over Israel-Gaza, she does well with African Americans in Detroit, for example. She's won Michigan twice. So they've had female governors before, Jennifer Granholm, but nonetheless, she projects well. She projects confidence. Seeing her on a stage with Donald Trump would be a debate people would want to watch. So I think it can't be haphazard. It can't be confusing. It has to be, we're old enough maybe to remember this guy named Bob Strauss, who was the dean of the Democratic Party, the biggest fundraiser. He manipulated things. You need somebody to be in a room and say, this is the person and this is who we're going to replace you with.
Yeah, but who has to agree to that?
Biden and Whitmer.
The
Biden
president
and Whitmer.
must agree.
And he doesn't
Good
sound
luck.
at this point that
Good
he
luck.
wants to step back. He was at the Waffle House, claiming victory last night.
saying it was
Anybody
good.
on your short list?
I think Whitmer's the first choice they would go to. I mean, you saw Gavin Newsom was on CNN last night, and
That would be disastrous.
Yeah, he's got too
To
much
me,
baggage.
I think Gavin Newsom would lose even worse than Biden.
Yeah. All right. Let's let us head on. We got a lot to tackle in this short 30 minutes. Salve Regina University put out a poll, which interestingly had Trump with within 7 points. This was before the debate last night. There were some other things. Governor McKee is in the tank in terms of his approval ratings. What did you take out of that poll?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big difference from the 20-point margin that Biden won last time. And, you know, I think it is reflective of some of the questions about, is he too old and all that. And but Democrats, as other pollsters have said, always come home. So I would suspect that number is going to go up as we get closer to the election.
What about Governor McKee's ratings?
Yeah, I think that reflects the Washington Bridge. There's been a ton of frustration and people sitting in traffic and how he handled it. And so I think that reflects that to a large extent.
What about the poll?
McKee was 32%. That's horrible. As far as Biden, 7 points, I couldn't be happier.
In Rhode Island?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he's 7 points ahead of Trump in Rhode Island. The last time I think we were that close was when Ronald Reagan ran in 1984, and he actually won. And here's why it's good for Rhode Island. We need balance in this state. We need a better balance at the State House. It's so overwhelmingly lopsided with one party, and that's never good. That doesn't get talked about enough. With someone like Trump running, whether you like him or not, he brings something good to the table for Rhode Island, which is the chance that we might elect some Republican representatives and senators and bring balance to the State House. It's so out of whack.
But that's always been the disparity between the national platform and where Rhode Islanders are thinking. Because if you go with where the Republican, it's not your Republican Party anymore, Nick. I mean, it's not the John Chafees. There are people who are, I mean, the MAGA Republicans in terms of abortion bans and that. I don't think that plays with mainstream Rhode Island.
Well,
so if you're running for the State House, they put the national platform around your neck.
They may, but...
As they did with Alan Fung. I mean, there's no question in 2018.
Here's something that's interesting. Donald Trump won Coventry and Johnston twice. How do you explain that?
Well, Johnston, I think we can explain. Coventry, I'd be a little more surprised about because they have a pretty active Democratic Party. But Johnston tends to be a little bit more conservative. And Rhode Island is this great state where people they're conservative in some of their views, but then they say, you know, live your life the way you don't get in my way. But when it comes down to it, the National Party is too far to the right for most Republicans in Rhode Island.
I don't, you know, I spent 10 years in the House. I was the minority whip when I left. When you go to people's doorsteps, they don't want to talk about national policy as long as you stick to state policy. You can,
and you have
to campaign
hard. So what would the Republicans do differently if they were running Rhode Island right now in the state legislature?
What would they?
What would they do differently? How would the budget have looked different if Republicans were in charge?
I think there would have been a lot more restraint in spending. Mm-hmm. I think we would have we'd have an inspector general right now if they were running. We wouldn't have things like Bridgegate, Depco, 38 studios, and then we have to hire lawyers to clean the whole mess up. Mm-hmm. Things like that.
Well, they probably wouldn't have taken the governor's budget, which was $13.7 billion, and added $250,000 to it that McKee didn't even ask for. I think if there was a Republican governor and they had the numbers to be able to veto that, I don't think the budget would be at $14 billion.
Right.
Do you?
I mean, no, but think about McKee. Who do you see on the landscape from the Republican side running against McKee in 2026? Is this about the Democrats unseating him in a primary, or is it about a viable Republican challenger?
Yeah, I mean, it's about the Democrats.
It's a short bench.
Yeah,
it's a very short bench.
Well, what if Nick's right and Republicans gain momentum in Rhode Island because of Trump in 2024, and then somebody emerges that could be? We've had Carcieri, we had Lincoln Almond, we've had Republican governors, John Chafee. Well, you know what? Why? Who's in the state now that could emerge to run?
A Republican governor who doesn't have some type of influence in the House or Senate is a governor that's really hogtied by the House and the Senate. And you're just so much better off with balance.
Look at the number of seats, though, that are unchallenged again.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the local Republican Party needs to.
I think Massachusetts is worse, though.
There are 8 people.
I think Massachusetts is
might be
worse.
but that's
they have
Is there
more
other?
unchallenged seats than we do. Yeah.
Yeah. So many seats unchallenged. And just to go back to the poll, I was surprised about the Salve poll. I was surprised by how many people were supporting RFK here in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
I forget
Well,
the exact
nobody.
number,
But that's about name recognition. Nobody. We don't know what he says. He doesn't. I mean, you know, when you listen to a speech by RFK, it's unnerving. I mean, Trump, we know.
He wishes he was on the stage
Yeah,
last
yeah,
night.
right.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Imagine.
Yeah,
If
no,
he had
that
been
would have
on
helped
us.
Biden. I
Yeah.
think there's no question if RFK was on the
He
stage.
could have taken
would
up some of
taken
that
out
air,
Trump,
right?
And it would have helped Biden. And they wanted to keep him out. They should realize. So
Biden might not have had the worst voice then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, RFK's voice itself is really, it was the minute Biden opened his mouth, you thought, oh my goodness, what happened? He needs a throat lozenge or some tea, like what is going on there? And Trump immediately looked more vibrant. And so, but every party has a watershed moment. We've had this in 1972 with turmoil in the Democratic Party, in 1968, obviously with Johnson, but that was earlier in the cycle. It's not unprecedented to have turmoil about who will be the nominee, and we'll have to wait and see whether the Democrats figure out poll by poll, state by state, how they're polling today about Gretchen Whitmer, right? The DNC is now polling on Gretchen Whitmer in the swing states.
Not enough time.
My
Not
suggestion
enough time.
is for the next debate, if there is one, that the Biden campaign bring in Jan Simone, who was our makeup artist.
Yes, I second that motion.
Ed, I heard that in the
Yes.
green room.
Yep.
Jan would have made him look like George Hamilton. He
Yep.
would have gone out there and he would have looked great. He looked pale. And you talked about the Nixon-JFK debate. I mean, the optics are so much.
Yeah, you just
isn't
didn't
it?
look at it. If they had Jan, maybe it's a different story.
Exactly. Jan could have been worth at least 5 points in Rhode Island. They'd have to re-poll after they look at that. Any thoughts about the General Assembly session this year? We have a few minutes left about the mop-up from that.
Well, I think the idea of it was in the Salve poll, and it got very, very good numbers. An inspector general. We need that. We've proven it again and again and again. In fact, from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, their inspector general came down and testified about why we should do that. It would be a good thing. If we don't have balance, at least let's have an inspector general who can keep an eye on things, because we know that doesn't always happen up under the dome on Smith Hill. Believe it or not.
I mean, I think more accountability is better. And the question, again, now, after we get through the presidential election and we see what the world looks like, then the questions will begin about McKee. Does he actually run with these numbers? Who announces? Who might run? Does Reed run again for Senate? Does that shake up politics in Rhode Island as well? He's sort of been talking about it, but I don't think that
he's got 2 more years before he's up.
Yeah, 26.
And he'll be in his late 70s, right?
Yeah, he is one of the most influential senators. Of all 100 senators, he's really one of the most influential. So walking away from that power. But if the Democrats lose the Senate, then you say, well, this isn't as much fun as it used to be. But I think that reverse might not reverse, but I think the stronger Trump looks, the more we'll see split ticket voting in this particular election at all sorts of levels. So the idea of Biden, will he bring down the entire Democratic ticket? No, because the incumbents and the people who are running are going to start to veer away from talking about Biden, talking about issues and Trump, abortion in particular, labor rights, unemployment, things like that. Then they're going to shift their strategy. And then voters who are on the fence will say, let's balance it all out. Exactly what you're talking about. We know we're going to need to contain Trump. Let's figure out a way to do that. So that, to me, seems like what might happen.
Where are the young people going to go, or are they going to stay on their couch?
That's a
the
good
big
question.
question,
I mean,
right?
will there be apathy? I think, the Middle East situation, Palestine, has got a lot of Democratic young voters upset. So, yeah, I think that could be a factor. And to go back to the budget, one thing included in it is the $120 million for a housing bond. And we just lost our housing secretary.
Yesterday, Stephen Pryor.
Stephen Pryor is going to step
Were you
down.
surprised he left or not? He's had 10
I
years.
mean, he hasn't been in there that long. It's the second time they've lost the housing secretary since creating the position a couple years ago. So, yeah, that is somewhat of a surprise. And that's a big job right now when you're going to have $120 million to be in
plus
in
the
control.
400, plus the 250.
I
plus
think
all of it.
he saw a mess that couldn't be fixed.
He may have.
And I think he said, I'm out of here.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think also that Speaker Shekarchi is personally very committed to helping the housing crisis in Rhode Island. And we see this with the granny flats. And I think he's going to keep his eye on this. I mean, I don't think he's going to say, okay, I passed it all, I'm done. I think he wants to, not just claim credit, but he wants to accomplish.
Execution at
Yeah, he
this
wants
point.
to get this done. And I think he will start to criticize McKee if this doesn't move along well. And who knows whether he might run in a primary for
He's
governor.
got enough money in his
got
campaign.
a
He's
lot
got
of money,
plenty of money.
you know.
All right, let's do outrageous and/or kudos. Nick, what do you have this week?
Well, the kudos would be to Leader Chippendale because he's the one who proposed the Inspector General, and I think that's a really good idea. I think we need it would probably require a constitutional amendment for the Inspector General to be effective. It needs to be in the Constitution in some form.
And the devil's in the details in terms of who appoints, who is it, are they from here, are they from out of state, all of that.
Right, and because the Democrat-controlled General Assembly has not placed anything on the ballot regarding a constitutional convention, it's mandatory. It must be on the ballot this time. So I hope a lot of people will vote for a constitutional convention. The last time we did anything was the separation of powers, which was a good thing. And I'm a little biased because I sponsored it. But, these are good things. We need to talk about this more. So the Inspector General, Bridgegate's going to power that like a Saturn V rocket. We need it.
Yeah. Well, it's like line item veto. I don't see the legislature giving up any of its power anytime soon unless they're beaten into it. Ed, what do you have?
I wrote about an outrageous story recently about the chief of the Warwick Water Division. There's a lawsuit in federal court that accuses him of this female employee was sexually harassed by a coworker, and when she reported it to the chief, he sexually harassed her. And he's the same guy who was accused of making a Nazi joke and slapping a Jewish employee that he was supervising, and he pled no contest to assault charges because of that. So they haven't responded to the lawsuit, but yeah, that's mine.
It's also interesting, I see that Mayor Picosi has an opponent. They weren't sure whether that was going to happen.
Yeah, it was going to be Steve McAllister, but he decided not to do it, and now Leah Hazelwood has
from the school committee, right?
School committee vice chair has declared for that seat. So yeah, he is going to face a campaign there.
Professor?
I am just going to have a kudo for our late colleague, Lou Polner, who I really loved being on Lively Experiment with for so many years. He always disagreed with me. I always disagreed with him. He used to sit there, and I would have loved to know what he thought about the debate. I would have loved to hear today what he thought about the debate. I just always thought he was a gracious, dignified, classy guy when I interacted with him, and he knew how to disagree with vigor and manners. And so I really, I miss him, and I'm sad for his loss, and so I just want to throw him.
Yeah, you and I texted right after that. I mean, I miss Lou deeply, and we texted a lot.
I know you did a tribute on the
a couple
on the
of weeks
show,
ago. Lou went I think he got the above and beyond. You remember, we taped for 10 months via Zoom, and Lou actually, I said, can you do it? He says, well, I got to prosecute a case. He found a conference room in district court and made sure the Wi-Fi was okay. And I looked at the picture the other day. There was Lou sitting back in this nondescript, but he wanted to be on the show badly that week. So
yeah, he was great.
So I appreciate that. Okay, folks, that is all the time we have. We appreciate your spending a little bit of your weekend with us, Ed and Wendy and Nick. Good to see you again. If you don't catch us Friday at 7 or Sunday at noon, we archive all of our shows at ripbs.org/lively. We're all over social media, and take us with you wherever you get your favorite podcast. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back here next week as the Lively Experiment continues.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazen White Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.